Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? It's a Monday morning here in Elgin, Minnesota, and it was Record Store Day this weekend, and I just have a few comments I want to share on that. It's a great institution. It's a mixed bag for record stores. I've talked to many record store owners over the years, and they end up tying up a lot of money on inventory, and their margins aren't great, and a lot of them get resold online for much more. And it's a bit of a gimmick in some ways. I hate to say it, but it is. Not to say there's lots of really cool stuff that comes out, but a lot of it is not canon. A lot of it is stuff that you need the insight of the regular discography of an artist to appreciate this. And a lot of this live stuff or unreleased stuff, it didn't get issued at the time, usually for a reason. And they're stretching the limits of what the artists would have had as acceptable at times. I mean, some of the stuff is more noteworthy than others, but just watching the Facebook pages and the fetishization of the RSD releases, and everyone's posting these same titles, it just seems like we're missing something. Everyone's going to end up with these same collections of these same RSD, same modern day reissues from Tone Poet and Kraft, and we're allowing the canon to be whittled down to such a small, narrow bandwidth of what the jazz canon truly is. And just as a quick, reminder, I have 6,500 jazz records in this room, maybe 7,000. It's in there somewhere. Mostly from 50 to 1970, a 20-year window. So that's putting about 350 records a year. No, sorry. Yeah, it's about 350 titles a year, give or take, on the main 60, 70 jazz labels. Of course, they didn't come out every day. They came out, once a week, sometimes a couple times a month. That label would issue stuff. And we're really allowing that to be whittled down to a couple dozen titles per year, as what the jazz canon was. And it's just really limiting people's grasp and understanding of what jazz is and was, how broad the brushstrokes are. There's a lot of people I've seen posting pictures of their collections, and it's all new reissues, all of it. And why aren't people collecting old used jazz records? And the first thing they're going to say, well, they're so expensive. Old Blue Notes are expensive, but even some old Blue Notes aren't. There's old Blue Note 3 Sounds records and old Blue Note Jimmy Smith records that aren't going to break the bank. There's some old prestige titles and soul jazz, Jack McDuff stuff that's not going to break the bank. There's plenty of Shorty Rogers and stuff on RCA and Capitol and Columbia that's a great price that is important jazz. And if you don't understand how great a player a guy like Jerry Mulligan or Shorty Rogers it just the list is kind of infinite. You need the perspective of everything to understand how great a player or not a great player somebody else is or was. I think there's just too much emphasis placed on RSD release titles. And I've collected some over the years. I don't really even pay attention to it much anymore. Again, a lot of it's very peripheral in terms of its importance. It's cool that they're unearthing this stuff. And some of its, main canon stuff that reiterated the Bill Evans Waltz for Debbie. That's an essential title of the jazz canon. But there's just such a fetishization of these RSD titles that it's a little gimmicky, and people are just jumping on this bandwagon, and they're ending up with inferior stuff that doesn't tell much of the story in a lot of ways. And that's not to diminish what these guys are doing or putting out. I mean, it's commendable that they're issuing this stuff and that people are buying it. But by all means, fill in the gaps of the jazz canon with used jazz LPs. Go to a record store and get a dozen old titles for $3, $4, $5, $6, $10 and learn some more of the history. I just think it's an essential thing for this music to move forward, to not have half the language be forgotten. We need to have that context for even the greats to have greatness. I mean, if you don't understand how an average trumpet player sounds, Clifford Brown, Freddie Hubbard won't have any significance. You need to have the context for so much of this, for any of it to have any significance or meaning. Some people really enjoyed the 10 most important jazz artists of the classic era. A few people kind of pushed back on a few things, and that's to be expected. And again, it's just a fun thing. It's just kind of I've been working a lot on original music lately, so my listening hasn't been as in-depth or as frequent. I've been kind of, when I have new songs in my head, my mind is often very much just trying to go through those songs and produce them in my mind so I know where I want to go with something. And often I don't play music aside from that for a day or two while I'm writing a new song. It's just I don't want to have my train of thought interrupted. That being said, there has been some fun stuff played the last couple weeks, and I'm going to show you some of that stuff right now. Right now we're playing a guy by the name of Bull Moose Jackson. Well, I want to find the cover for this guy. Bull Moose Jackson. He's a fantastic artist who exists somewhere between the jump blues, rhythm and blues, the blues itself, jazz. There's a lot of early elements here. Early rock and roll isn't that far away from Bull Moose Jackson. Chuck Berry. It just has a lot of those elements. I mean, you can hear some Elvis even in some of these songs. A fun player, a lot of tongue-in-cheek. It's not quite as jump blues or as crossover as maybe Louis Jordan, but it's probably a little bit closer to rhythm and blues and rock and roll than Louis Jordan is. He occupies a time frame in the 40s and 50s, and it's really a fun listen. A great artist with some great titles. I really think some of the songs are quite hilarious. Why Don't You Haul Off and Love Me? Big Fat Mamas Are Back in Style Again. Nosy Joe. I mean, Sneaky Pete. The Bull Moose Jackson Blues. Fare Thee Well, Deacon Jones. I mean, it's fun stuff. A guy you should worth seeking out. And a notable player. I had a great blues player here the other night by the name of Mike Munson. Local guy who plays the Mississippi Hill Country Blues. He plays some Delta Blues. And I played some fun blues stuff after his set. I just kind of want to show you some of this stuff. Some Howlin' Wolf. And the rawness and looseness of Howlin' Wolf. I mean, it's funny how I played some blues and then I played some Ellington. And how you can hear the blues and the swing in both. And the Black Preacher in both. Although the sophistication of Ellington, more Howlin' Wolf. And these are just kind of legendary sessions from the Chess label. I played some John Lee Hooker, one of the great songsters of that time. I played some Muddy Waters. And the blues is the other side of the jazz story. In some ways, it's kind of the rural counterpart to the urbanity of jazz. Elmore James, great player. A little bit later with Bobby Blue Bland. Ain't no fun in the city. What's that song called? Man, that's a great tune. Ain't no love in the heart of the city. What a great song that is. Some B.B. King on ABC. Albert King. It was just some fun stuff to kind of put out there at the end of their set the other night as people were kind of mingling and finishing off their alcohol. But Bull Moose Jackson's a guy really worth checking out. He's a real transitional guy from that period where jazz and blues were morphing into the jump blues and into the rhythm blues and into early rock and roll. And early rock and roll is so rooted in the R&B. They're almost interchangeable, which is really a misconception of what early rock and roll was. I've put on records that were called greatest hits of art rock and roll from the late 40s, early 50s, and it's just R&B. You know, I mean, it's funny how that transition almost kind of slips by people, but this is on the Pacific record label. Joe Pass, what a great player Pass was with a great pianist, Claire Fisher. I listened to this maybe 4 times the other day. Just a beautiful lyricist, a guy with a wonderful tone. I mean, that kind of goes for all guitar players in jazz. Pretty young Joe Pass here. And Summertime here is fantastic. Mood Indigo was fantastic. This is a Pacific title, number P73. Probably puts it in like 63, 64. Great stuff. Really a solid listen. This next album here is by Clara Bryant. It's on the Mode label. And she was a female trumpet player. And she also sings some on this. There's a couple of the great players on this, including Ben Tucker, Walter Benton on the tenor, Normie Faye on the trumpet, Roger Fleming on the piano. She's got the blue Mode ink on the back for her old pressing. She's a great player with a wonderful tone. If I remember, she came out of Texas and she led an all-female group for a while. It might have even been associated with being in the military. She had an all-female group that played for a while. And of course, the females were given so much less shrift in terms of popularity and where they could play. But Clara Bryant's definitely a name that, if you see her album, I think she only has 1 or 2. They're definitely worth grabbing. The great Frank Rosolino, one of the great bone players of this era, again on the Mode label, with Richie Kamuka on the tenor, who's just beautiful on this. Young Vince Guaraldi, Monty Budwig, and Stan Levy's on the drums. Great West Coast, hard swinging, cool bop essentially. This is not a cool record, it's cool bop. It moves hard, it's got a great tempo. Rosalina's a fantastic player. Not one that should be overlooked by anybody, anytime. A nice Blue Note title here. Donald Byrd, Bird in Flight, sorry. With Mobley, Pearson, Watkins, Workman, Humphreys. And so with McLean, Mobley, and Watkins, you have 3 guys that are Jazz Messenger alumni. And as I said before, that early Blue Note era from 55, 6, all the way through 60, 61, even later is dominated by Jazz Messenger alumni. And 60, 61, they started introducing some new players, the label, but there's still a plethora of Horace Silver, Art Blakey, Donald Byrd, Hank Mobley, Lee Morgan, Curtis Fuller. It's just an incredible body of work by that stable of musicians. A fun 10-inch here, really hard to find record. Art Pepper. This is on the Discovery label out of Hollywood. His 10 inches on Discovery, 2 of them can go for good money, hundreds of dollars at times. Art Pepper's already well on his way into becoming the player that he was. This is probably from 53, maybe 54. Tough record to track down. Both of his 10 inches on Discovery are hard records to come by. And I'm trying to remember if these were reissued on Savoy. I don't think they were. That Surf Ride is a reissue of something, but I'm not sure if it's this. It could be, actually. These could be on that Surf Ride Savoy release. I can't remember. It's been a while. A lot of stuff going through my head. This is again on Pacific number Pacific 63. Again, the P series is the second series at Pacific. They had a 1200 sequence, which runs about 100 titles from 55 through about 59. Then they launched a short-lived 400 series, and sequentially with that, they also issue the P series, which starts at 1. And there's a shift in the sound of the label somewhat at that point. Les McCann is a fantastic player. Live at the Village Gate, plays the Shampoo. This was a fun session. It really cooks. Ron Jefferson's on the bass, Herbie Lewis is on the bass, Ron Jefferson's on the drums. Fantastic West Coast. I would call that cool. That's a cool record. Yellow Canary on the Verve label by Kenyon Hopkins. This dives into jazz, but also has a lot of arranged parts. It's a soundtrack to a film starring Pat Boone, believe it or not. A young James Dean looking Pat Boone, to be honest. It's a fun record, and echoes of, Mancini and some of the other guys from that era. It really sets the tempo and a visual kind of, you'll feel like you're watching a movie listening to it. And it was on the Verve 8000 series, which is why I grabbed it. Oscar Peterson plays the Harold Arlen songbook. And this is from the second set of songbook records that Peterson does. The first session, I think, was with Ray Brown and, was it Barney Kessel in the first session? But they re-record a lot of that stuff because when they went to reissue it, their master tapes had deteriorated to some degree. And so Norman has Oscar Peterson re-record all of the songbook records, like 9, 10 of them, from Ellington to the Gershwin to Peter to Harold, all of them, Rogers and Hart. And this second group, I think, is with Ed Thigpen and Ray Brown, a trio setting again. And Peterson is just one, and I'm not a big fan of these covers from the second series. And the second series shows up in the 2000 sequence. But those are not just reissues of the Clef series. Those are all new recordings. Saratoga, Paul Smith Trio. Paul Smith is a great jazz piano player who worked with Ella Fitzgerald, among others. This is on the Imperial label of the West Coast. And this also has some film show tune crossover. Some of this gets a little bit arranged, but there's some great playing on that as well. Speaking of Peterson, this is the original series, playing Richard Rogers. This is on Clef, number 624. So this is the original set of Peterson songbook stuff, those covers. And equally delightful, Herb Ellis. It looks like it might be Herb Ellis. I was actually on the first trio, not Barney Kessel. This is a fantastic record. Paul Chambers. I played this record and talked about it before. The Miles Davis group was out west. Miles just abandons them and flies home, doesn't leave them any money, any plane tickets. And so the group is kind of stranded there. And it's a fantastic group with Coltrane, Kenny Drew, Philly Joe Jones, and Paul Chambers. And of course, Chambers, Jones, and Coltrane end up becoming part of that great quintet that forms the Red Garland shortly after this. And part of why that quintet added Red Garland is because Kenny Drew was so pissed off at Miles for leaving him out west that Drew quit the group, and he did so by giving Miles a punch when he got back to New York. Punched him in the jaw. Again, Miles' legend is such a mixed bag, but their solution to getting back home was Paul Chambers knew a guy, and this is on the score, but this originally was also an Imperial record, if I recall. And they recorded this fantastic session. Hard to find record for sure. So this is Oscar Moore, a great guitar player who played with Nat Cole, among others. This is on the Skylark label that it was reissued on the Tampa imprint. Skylark and Tampa were run by the same guy, and he kind of folds all the Skylark stuff into the Tampa imprint eventually. But Oscar Moore is a great player. It's a short run, this record, because it was a 10-inch initially, but great stuff. And if you see that, don't pass it up. Ray Bryant, fantastic player with a lot of R&B in his sound. A real soulful, bluesy guy. This is on the Cadet label, which is what Argo becomes. Argo, Cadet were the jazz side of the Chess record family out of Chicago. Argo got sued for its name because there was a label in the UK called Argo. So they eventually changed that label's name to Cadet and just run that sequence, continue with the same numbers. So being 830, this puts us late 60s. There's a great version of the Horace Silver song from my father on here that a guest wanted to play her a few weeks back, and I played that for them, and they were thrilled to hear it. A fantastic record here, House of Lights, by one of my favorite players, Eddie Costa. a fantastic piano player, one of the strongest left hands in jazz. The guy was a great vibraphonist as well, but the thunder that he played the piano with, especially in those mid to low octaves, it's a really unique approach to piano, and not one you're going to hear replicated very often in the jazz world. And this is a guy by the name of Bill Donati. William Donati presents something different on the Tampa label. A lot of West Coast stuff in this selection of records. Cool cover. Not a very famous piano player, but he's an elegant player. He was on red vinyl on the Tampa label. He has a couple of records on Donati, William Donati, good Italian name. He has a couple of records on Tampa. Again, the West Coast cats. A lot of those white guys, they become fairly forgotten in today's language. But a lot of what I just showed you will never be reissued. It'll never be a selection for the craft label to put out or Tone Poet to issue. And so it just shows you how much of the jazz canon you're missing if you don't collect used jazz records. And most of what I just showed you, that stuff's going to be $5 to $20. I mean, a lot of that stuff's not being collected, not being sought after. The Chambers record will go for more. I mean, a few other titles in there, the Oscar Moore for original press is going to be expensive. But most of that stuff's not going to break the bank. But it's part of the jazz story. And there's a lot you can glean and a lot you can learn by delving deeper into this music. One of the pieces I want to show you, I played this the other night at West Welk, and then one of my live sets, one of the bands was here. And this is Oscar Pettiford, one of the most important bass players in jazz. You really start with Blanton, who played with Ellington. And Jimmy Blanton was a fantastic bassist who pushed the bass into the forefront of the band. And it went from just being kind of an instrument that was striding and plodding along to becoming an intricate and elaborate part of the orchestration. Blanton was an instrumental person in the development of where jazz bass playing goes. And Blanton had tuberculosis and dies really young, sadly. And it's really Oscar Pettiford who picks up that torch. In the late 40s, early 50s, he's on a lot of the early bebop recordings. He dies also tragically young by 1959, 60, 61. He passes away. Forget the exact date. So his body of work isn't immense as well. But if you look at the Scott LaFaros and all the guys that came later, they all owe a big debt of service to Oscar Pettiford and, of course, Jimmy Blanton. And this is a cool record. It's a 7-inch on Imperial, again, on the West Coast. And it was them playing cello. And if I remember, right on my readers on here, the other great bass player from the West Coast is on this. Harry Babison. And Babison and Pettiford are both playing cello at times. And then Joe Comfort's playing the upright bass. So you have 3 bass players, 2 of which are playing cello. And it's a really fun. This was probably originally actually a 78. It's a 4-song EP, which again, that would have been the 4 songs probably from the 78, and they transferred it to a 45 EP early in that 50s era of the 45 invention. You know, fun 50s cover. I love that kind of artwork. Just beautiful. I can't remember who's on the piano here. But this is a really important session, to be honest, and not one you're going to find very easily. And for a 7-inch, it might cost you a little more than you're comfortable with, but just a cool find. I've had this for probably a year or two, and it's in my display case over there, and I busted it the other day to show somebody. I figured I'd share it with you. So yeah, Pettiford, one of the great players that definitely deserves a nod and a lot of recognition. And so by all means, collect your Tone Poets and your craft recording reissues and your record store day stuff. And I mean, all that stuff is of value. But don't forget the lion's share of the jazz canon. So much of what's sitting out there, and a lot of it's very affordable. You'll find a lot of it for, and don't be scared to buy a $5, $10 jazz record. It doesn't have to be something that the cool people in the jazz groups post every day for it to be good. trust me, their knowledge is pretty limited as well. And that's partly why I don't go on the Facebook groups as much, because you see the same 200 records posted every day. Oh, look, another version of Lee Morgan. Oh, look, another Coltrane. Oh, look, more Alice Coltrane. I mean, it's the same minimal approach to collecting jazz. And there's just so much more to the story. You're missing so much of the backdrop. And again, without that backdrop having any kind of context, it's really hard to have any real insight. And so a lot of these guys even talking on the YouTube channels, without the extent of the extended family of the jazz canon, their insight into the music is quite limited. You only know how great a player somebody is when you've heard dozens of other players on that horn. I mean, it's just a natural, obvious thing to say. If you've only seen one running back in football, you don't really know how great he is. You need context. You need to know how special O.J. Simpson was in his prime. There's a positive word about O.J. Simpson on the internet right now. Boom. He was a great running back in the 1970s. So anyway, that wraps up today's episode. Just a quick rundown of some things we've been listening to in the cafe. We appreciate your support, everybody who's donated to the channel. We do very much appreciate that through Patreon, through PayPal, through the YouTube algorithm and super thanks. Any way you want to help the channel and help the cafe, it is appreciated. If you're looking for merchandise for the Jazz Shepherd, message me and we can send you something as a thank you. We appreciate you all very much. We do need your help and support. It's a tough business making this thing work right now, but we appreciate you all so much. I mean, you all have been a very integral part of this. Love the comments and feedback. What's your favorite of those records I posted? Have you heard some of them? Have you heard none of them? Because again, none of that stuff's probably been reissued. Y'all have a great day. We'll talk to y'all soon. Peace.